When my sister Betsy and I were kids, our family lived for a while in a charming old farmhouse. We loved exploring its dusty corners and climbing the apple tree in the backyard. But our favorite thing was the ghost. We called her Mother because she seemed so kind and nurturing. Some mornings, Betsy and I would wake up, and on each of our nightstands we'd find a cup that hadn't been there the night before. Mother had left them there, worried that we'd get thirsty during the night. She just wanted to take care of us. Among the house's original furnishings was an antique wooden chair, which we kept against the back wall of the living room. Whenever we were preoccupied watching TV or playing a game, Mother would inch that chair forward across the room towards us. Sometimes she'd manage to move it all the way to the center of the room. We always felt sad putting it back against the wall. Mother just wanted to be near us. Years later, after we'd moved out, I found an old newspaper article about the farmhouse's original occupant, a widow. She'd murdered her 2 children by giving them each a cup of poisoned milk before bed. Then she hung herself. The article included a photo of the farmhouse's living room with a woman's body hanging from a beam. Beneath her, knocked over, was that old wooden chair, placed exactly in the center of the room. Little Emily vanished last year. Now they're pouring new sidewalks in my neighborhood, and I found her name in the wet cement, written in remembrance. But it was written in reverse and from below. I bought a new house in the small town of Quebec, Ontario. The house was cheap, but the most important part was that I needed to get away from the city. A few months ago, I had a run-in with a stalker. While I had managed to get her arrested, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes just constantly watching me. I felt like there were eyes everywhere, at home and on the street, so I decided to move out into the country to somewhere with less people, just for peace of mind. The house itself was big and somewhat old, but otherwise very welcoming. The agent who introduced me to the house had been required to mention that a serial killer had lived here in the past, which was why the house was so cheap. However, he and later my next-door neighbor Sarah both told me to pay the thought no mind. 4 other owners had lived in the house since then, and all of them were very happy with it. I loved the house. Its interior furnishings were beautiful and very comfortable. The people of Quebec were friendly, often bringing over freshly baked pastries or inviting me over for dinner. Get-togethers, they said, were the key to making sure everyone who lived in Quebec loved it there. Yet after a week, I stopped loving it. The feeling of someone watching returned, worse than before. I tried to ignore it, but soon I started losing sleep. Giant bags grew under my eyes, and I began yawning almost as much as I breathed. Sarah was kind enough to let me stay in her house for a few nights. It was during this time that I heard the legend of Forrest Carter, the serial killer who had lived in my house. While no one knows his exact kill count, Carter, also known as the Quebec Peacock, was a man with extremely severe case of narcissism. Legends say that he couldn't fall asleep if he didn't feel like he was being watched. He was finally arrested for putting up a scarecrow to watch him during the night. Only it wasn't a scarecrow. Carter had murdered a 17-year-old girl just so her corpse could stare at him. The story gave me shivers, and after I went home, I felt like there were hundreds of pairs of eyes just watching me no matter how I turned. Today, however, was the first day that I acted out. I was cooking breakfast when I felt the eyes. Instinctively, out of fear, I threw my kitchen knife where it lodged itself into the wall. As I pulled it out, I found myself staring at a pair of eyes, pickling in formaldehyde. I've been watching the police peel away the drywall of my house for a few hours now. So far, they found 142 pairs of eyes in little glass jars. The scariest thing is, each and every one of them was staring at me. It seems so cliche to start by saying I don't believe in ghosts, but however, that's where I'm coming from. A few years ago, I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment, and it was my first time that I was living on my own. So the apartment block had been built in the 1930s, and I'd been there for a few months when I came home from work one day and went into the bathroom. I saw something strange. The wooden board covering a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space lay broken in two pieces on the ground. I examined the broken pieces. The board was an inch thick, and it would have taken a Bruce Lee-type person to break it. I thought the landlord had sent someone to work on the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. I thought, someone is up there for sure. So later on that night, I emailed the pictures to the landlord asking if anyone had been there. Of course, with an undertone of annoyance since she hadn't warned me. Her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you're able to." So I called, and she explained that her last two tenants had the same thing happen. She promised to replace the board, and of course she did. About a month later, I woke up one night around 4 a.m., and I had so many goosebumps, it felt like someone was rubbing his or hands on me. Everything was silent, but then I heard this sound coming from above my bed. It was a dragging sound, like someone pulling a sack of potatoes. I was frozen stiff with fear. I thought, someone is up there for sure, but there's no way an animal can make that sound. After 5 minutes, I managed to work up the courage to turn on the light and walk to the bathroom. I was armed with a baseball bat, of course. When I looked, I saw the new board covering the hole was broken in two again. I felt sick to my stomach. The dragging sound had stopped, but then I heard something else. Whispering. The sound was clear and coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices, and all I could hear was one sentence repeated over and over again. "It's your turn. It's your turn." I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel normal. It was 5 a.m., and it was dark outside. So I decided to watch TV to try and unwind. Then, a fuse blew. So my pet budgie Dexter, whom I kept in the kitchen, he usually never made a sound at night, but he started to squawk like he was being strangled. I'd never heard them make those noises before. He was basically screaming. So I grabbed my car keys, ran out, and sat in my car and waited till the sun came up. When I saw people walking their dogs, this comforted me enough to go back inside. The front door was open, but I thought I hadn't closed it when I ran outside. So I went into the kitchen to check on Dexter, and he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked into the bathroom, I heard a splashing. Dexter was half drowned in the toilet. I took him out, washed him up, and dried him off. I was so confused. I had no idea what was happening. So around 8 o'clock in the morning, I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of the night. And her reply was, "Oh wow, you heard the whispering too?" So I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months, almost 2 years. I did hear the whispering on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling had moved. Although now I live elsewhere, the landlord recently called. She said that her new tenants had begged to speak with me about some of the stuff that's been going on there. I thought to myself, forget it. It's their problem now. When I was about 16 years old, I was riding horses with my friend in the field beside her house. The horse threw me, and I hit my head. I hit my head very, very hard. The next thing I know, I'm on my back in incredible pain, staring up at my friend. She's frantically screaming at me, dazed. My gaze shifted and refocused on her friend behind her. He was a tall, thin man wearing a black suit and an old-fashioned, wide-brimmed hat, long white hair, yellowish-colored teeth, and he was staring at me, unblinking, into my eyes, over my friend's shoulder. Days later, she came to visit me in the hospital, and I decided to ask her about the man I'd seen. I thought it was the new boyfriend that she recently told me about, which was strange because he seemed like he was a lot older than she was. She told me that there was no one there but me and her. One day, a strange phenomenon started happening. People started falling from the sky. They were never clothed, and they always had a petrifying grin on their face. It had just been a few at first, but then hundreds of thousands would fall at a time, destroying cars, homes, and blocking off highways. Strange discoveries were made upon research. They were all human, but they lacked any blood, intestines, or even a heart. No one could explain the hideous grins that they had, or even where they came from. It was a woman in Costa Rica who had made the latest and most disturbing discovery. She had recognized one of the fallen bodies as a long-dead relative, one who died way back when she was a teenager. The more and more identifications were made. Soon, people were picking out their long-dead loved ones amongst the video feeds, cadaver piles, and crematoriums. No one could explain why they were coming back, falling from the sky. Even more distressing, after disposing of the bodies, it wouldn't be long until that same body came plummeting from the sky again. You couldn't get rid of them, no matter what you tried. People were getting killed by the higher volume of fallen bodies, and soon, after burial, they too began to fall. My mother unfortunately was killed when a body landed on her car, crushing her. But the next week, the news reported on a body that had got lodged in an airplane windshield. And on that newscast, I saw my mother's grinning face, the happiest I had ever seen her. They say when hell is full, the dead shall walk the earth. But what about heaven? One evening when I was in my junior year of high school, my mom and dad went out, leaving me home alone. I had a lot of homework to do, so I spent the whole evening sitting at my desk in my bedroom. My parents left the house around 6 p.m. While I was doing my homework, I put on my headphones and listened to really loud music. There was a big storm that night, and my desk was facing the window so I could see the rain and the lightning outside. My parents got back around 11 p.m. When I saw their car drive up, I took off my headphones, and as soon as my mom opened the front door and came inside, I heard her shout my name. "What on earth happened in here?" she demanded in an angry voice. Confused, I ran downstairs. My mom was standing in the hallway with a furious look on her face. She pointed at the floor and yelled, "Was this you?" I looked down and I saw the carpet was covered in muddy footprints. "I have no idea how those got there," I said. "I spent the whole night at my desk doing my homework." I watched as they looked around, and the looks on their face had changed from anger to confusion, and then to fear. We both realized it at the same time. Someone else must have been in the house. So we followed the trail of footprints, trying to make sense of the whole situation. They started at the back door, which we usually left unlocked. Then we noticed something else. The footprints may have started at the back door, but there was no trail of footprints leaving through the back door. All of a sudden we heard something, a really loud pounding noise that echoed throughout the house. Then the sound of the front door being wrenched open and slammed shut again. Wham! We all ran into the garage and locked the door behind us. My mom took out her cell phone and called the police. "Please come quickly," she shouted. "Someone's in our house." After what seemed like hours, a patrol car arrived with 2 police officers, a male and a female. One officer stayed with us in the garage while his partner went through the house, searching it room by room. When she came back, the female officer told us that there was nobody in the house and it was safe to go back in. As we were all breathing a sigh of relief, she asked, "Whose bedroom is upstairs on the left?" My parents looked at me. "Well, that's my bedroom," I told the officer. She asked us to follow her. As we walked through the house, we could see the trail of muddy footprints leading from the back door, through the living room, through the hallway and up the stairs, into my parents' bedroom, and then towards my room. They stopped at my doorway. The female officer pointed at my door, which had been open the whole night. But scrawled on it in black marker was the following: 8:47 p.m. I see you. 8:53 p.m. You forgot to lock the back door. 8:59. You seem focused. 9:24. Turn around. 9:47. Look at me. 10:15. Look at me. 10:37. Look at me. 10:49. Look at me. For more than 2 hours, someone had been standing in my doorway, watching me. To this day, I still shudder to think what would have happened if I had actually turned around. My name is John. When I was a little boy, my parents took me to visit my grandmother. She lived in a little village in the countryside. Her cottage was very small, and there was only one bedroom. My grandmother slept in one bed, my parents slept in the other, and I had to sleep on some cushions on the floor. We stayed there for a few weeks, and I was troubled by terrible nightmares. Every night I would wake up screaming. My parents tried to calm me down and ask me what was wrong, but all I could tell them was that there was a man coming to get me. I can still remember the cause of my terror. Every night I would see a shadow figure emerge from behind the curtains in the corner of the room. He was pitch black, and all I could make out was his outline. He was tall and hairy, and I would watch in horror as he came crawling towards me with a sickening slowness. He came up to me and whispered something in my ear, and as I was just about to scream, he would place a finger against his lips and whisper, "Shush, shush, shush." He tortured me every night to the point where I dreaded going to sleep. As time went on, he began to appear not only at night, but also during the day. One evening, we were all watching TV in the living room, and at some point I happened to glance to my left. The curtain slowly drew back, and I saw the man standing there staring silently at me. But like normal, he raised his hand and put his finger to his lips and whispered, "Shush, shush, shush." I let out a horrific scream and immediately told my mother what I had seen. She got up and went over to the curtains, pulling them back and forth, showing me that there was nothing there. But of course by then he'd already disappeared. When the holiday was over, we went back to our apartment in the city, and the nightmare stopped. After that, my grandmother would always come to visit us instead, so we never went to her cottage on vacation again. As time went on, I stopped thinking about the man and eventually forgot about him altogether. But one summer when I was 13 years old and my little brother was 5, we went to stay with my grandmother again. My parents were in the kitchen having a cup of tea with her, and they asked me to get my little brother ready for bed. While I was preparing a mattress on the floor for both of us to sleep on, my little brother was sitting up on one of the beds, and I noticed that he was being unusually quiet. When I looked up, I saw that he was staring at something. "What's wrong?" I asked him. Then suddenly he jerked his head around and looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. "John," he said, pointing at the curtains, "the shush man is standing there." Needless to say, my brother and I spent the night sleeping in the kitchen, and we never went to visit my grandmother's cottage again. So about a month ago, my girlfriend and I got engaged. We moved into a new apartment and began living together. It was the first time either one of us had shared an apartment, so it was a new experience for both of us. We were deeply in love. I knew she was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and I thought she felt the same about me. Everything went well until about 2 weeks ago, when I noticed that my girlfriend was acting very strangely. She became so attached to me that it felt like she couldn't stand being away from me for a moment. One evening, she said to me, "Darling, when you're not home, I still feel you near me." I didn't attach much importance to these words. I thought she was just being affectionate. However, a few days later, she told me something else. "Whenever you're at work," she said, I often hear your voice, as if you're calling my name. This began to happen more and more as the days went by, and I started to get a little worried about her. One day, when I arrived home from work, I found her sitting silently at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall, with a glazed look in her eyes. I grabbed a chair and sat down beside her and asked her what was the matter. "I think there's something wrong with me," she murmured. "Well, why do you think that?" I asked. "I saw you today," she said. "You walked from the kitchen into the bedroom, and then you stood back to me, staring out the window." "But I was at work all day," I said. "I know," she replied with a sigh. That's when I really began to worry. I suspected my girlfriend was losing her mind and starting to have hallucinations. Over the next few days, she kept telling me that she saw me in the apartment when I was at work. She could even describe exactly what I was wearing. My girlfriend was also acting more and more strange. She was getting more and more quiet, and she was terrified of being left alone. Sometimes she would just sit there silently staring at me. Last night, my girlfriend was very tired and decided to go to bed early. I held her hand and sat on the edge of the bed as she was falling asleep. But just before she nodded off, she said, "You're not here." "But, honey, I'm right here," I replied. "Don't worry, everything is fine." "No, you're not here," she said. "You're in the kitchen." Just then I heard a dull noise coming from the kitchen. It sounded like a chair scraping across linoleum. Then I heard the sound of footsteps walking down the hallway. Fear gripped my heart, and I didn't know what to do. All of a sudden the handle to the bedroom door began to turn, and the door slowly began to open. Maybe it's just a draft, I thought, as my eyes grew wide with fear. But it wasn't. It wasn't a draft at all. The door swung open, and I saw a man standing there in the doorway. It was me. It was difficult to describe exactly what I saw, but it was me. But at the same time, it wasn't me. It was as if I was staring at myself in a mirror, but the other me had cold, lifeless eyes. The other me looked at me for a moment, then turned and left, shutting the door behind me. It took me a moment to recover from the shock, and then I sprang off the bed and I ran after him. The hallway was empty. I checked the kitchen, then I checked the bathroom, but he was nowhere to be found. The other me, he just simply vanished. It was terrifying. And then, as I stood in the hallway, trying to figure out what just happened, trying to calm myself down and convince myself that it was just a hallucination, I heard a faint voice coming from the kitchen. But it wasn't my voice. It was the voice of my girlfriend. "We are here to stay," she said, "forever." But I realized that my girlfriend wasn't in the kitchen. She was laying in the bedroom, exactly where I had just left her seconds before. I was so frightened that I started trembling like a leaf. I ran into the bedroom, grabbed my girlfriend, dragging her with me out the front door. We left the apartment that very moment and spent the night at my parents' house. Tomorrow, we will go back and pick up our things. I still can't understand what happened in that apartment, but neither of us can bear to spend another night there. Hopefully, when we pick up our things, all will be well, and there won't be anyone there. One day, a young married couple went hiking in the mountains. As the sun began to set, they realized that they were lost. The wife was getting worried, but her husband tried to calm her down and assure her that everything would eventually be all right and they would find their way back to their car. However, after walking for hours, they still had no idea where they were. It was growing dark and the man and wife were just getting desperate. They didn't have a map or a compass with them, and all the trees started to look the same. Just when they were about to give up hope, they came across an old cabin in a clearing. The cabin looked as if it had seen better days. It was dilapidated, and it seemed like it hadn't been used in a long, long time. Some of the windows were cracked and broken, and a lot of the tiles had fallen off the roof. The husband knocked on the front door, but there was no response. When he turned the handle, it slowly creaked open. Inside, they found that it was in a bad state of disrepair. There was very little furniture, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. As the couple cautiously looked around, they noticed a strange atmosphere and a peculiar musty smell. The walls were covered from floor to ceiling with graffiti, and written in red paint, the words "Death, Death, Death, Death" were repeated over and over again. The man and woman were unnerved. With a shaking hand, the husband reached out to touch the wall. He was horrified to find that the paint was not yet dry. The couple was very frightened, but they had nowhere else to go. They knew that the mountain was dangerous at night and there were a lot of wild animals prowling the woods. Despite the creepy writing on the walls, they decided to stay the night. Going upstairs, they found a moth-eaten mattress that was covered in stains. The husband and wife wrapped themselves in an old piece of carpet to keep warm and tried to make themselves as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. They lay down together on the mattress and eventually managed to fall asleep. Sometime after midnight, the couple were awakened by a strange rustling noise. It sounded like someone or something was moving around outside. "Did you hear that?" asked his wife. "I think there's somebody out there." Her husband listened for a while, but he didn't hear anything. So he got out of bed and walked over to the window. Of course, it was too dark outside to see anything, so opening the window, he stuck his head out. "Who's out there?" he called nervously. There was no answer. He was about to go back to bed when his wife said, "Maybe it's someone who can't speak." The husband returned the window. "Is there anybody out there? Clap once for yes and twice for no." He strained his ears to listen. The stars twinkled in the night sky, the crickets were chirping loudly, and all of a sudden he heard a loud clap. The man turned to his wife and said in surprise, "You were right. There's someone out there." He leaned out the window and his eyes scanned in the darkness. He couldn't make anything in the pitch black. "Are you the owner of this cabin?" he asked. Clap, clap. "Are you a man?" Clap, clap. "You're a woman then?" Clap, clap. "Are you human?" Clap, clap. A chill ran down his spine. He swallowed hard and croaked, "Did you come here alone?" Clap, clap. "Well, how many people are with you?" Clap once for each person. Clap, 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 clap. And the clapping went on and on. The man and woman looked at each other, got up, and ran out of the house as fast as they could. One night, a father and his daughter were driving down a deserted country road. They were returning home after spending the entire day visiting the girl's mother in hospital. Listening to the sound of the rain drumming on the car roof, the girl began to doze off. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The father struggled with the steering wheel, but the car skidded off the wet road and slammed into a stone wall. After checking that his daughter was uninjured, the man got out of the car to survey the damage. Both of the front tires had been punctured, and the right fender was crumpled up against the wall. The rest of the car had survived unscathed. "We must have driven over something on the road," he explained to his daughter. "Whatever it was, it blew out both of the tires." "Well, you can fix it, right?" asked his daughter, somewhat shaken by the accident. "Well, no, not really," replied her father, shaking his head. "I've only got one spare tire in the trunk. I'll have to walk back into town and find someone to tow the car," he said. "It really isn't that far from here. You can wait in the car while I'm gone." "Well, okay," she said reluctantly. "But please don't take too long." The man could see in his daughter's eyes that she was frightened. "Sit tight," replied the father as he closed the car door. "I'll be back as soon as possible." His daughter watched him in the rearview mirror as he trudged off down the road in the pouring rain and disappeared into the night. More than an hour had passed, and her father still hadn't returned. The girl began to wonder what was taking him so long. She was very worried because he should have been back by now. Just then, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure in the distance walking towards the car. At first, she thought it was her father, but when she turned to take a closer look, she realized that it was a strange man. He was dressed in overalls and had a big bushy beard. He was carrying something large in his left hand, swinging it back and forth. Something about this man made her very, very nervous. As he approached, she stared out the back window and squinted her eyes. In the dim light, she could just make out what he was clutching in his right hand. It was a big, sharp butcher's knife. Thinking quickly, the terrified girl locked both doors in the front of the car, then jumped into the back seat and locked the rear doors. When she looked up again, she saw that the strange man had stopped in his tracks and seemed to be staring directly at her. Suddenly, the man raised his arm in the air, and the girl let out a blood-curdling scream. In his left hand, he was clutching her father's severed head. She just kept screaming and screaming. She couldn't stop herself. Her heart was pounding, and she was struggling to breathe. The grotesque expression on their father's face was horrifying to behold. His mouth was hanging open, and his eyes were rolled back in his head. When the man reached the car, he shoved his face right up against the window and glowered at her with his crazed, bloodshot eyes. His hair was wild and matted with dirt. His face was covered in deep scars. For a moment, he just stood there in the driving rain, grinning at her like a madman. Then, he reached into his pocket, took something out, and slowly lifted his hand. He was holding her father's car keys. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons, and I'll see you all next time.